Hello, my name is Logan Braley, and I'm a student at MCC. And today I will be giving you a presentation, or kind of like a lecture, about Paul the Apostle and his missionary journeys. My goal for today is to recap in chronological order, or at least as closely as I can, the missionary journeys of Paul, by detailing the different events that happened and the different locations that he visited, the people he interacted with, things kind of like of that nature. I also just want to talk about who Paul was, what ended up happening to him, how he came to be the person that, ended up taking these journeys, just the various things like that. This presentation is for my history class, more specifically, Western Civilization to the year 1500, or History 101 WO2X, which is taught by Professor George Maniades. To start, I'm going to be giving you guys an introduction to who Paul was. Or at least here I'm going to be giving you guys a little overview of the agenda for today and just everything that I plan on talking about. So I'm going to start by talking about who Paul was, his background and education, things like that, how he ended up converting to Christianity later on in life. And then I'm going to go through Paul's main three missionary journeys that he takes, his journey to Rome, and then eventually I want to talk about what happened to Paul, which we don't know for sure what happened to him. We just have different ideas that I kind of want to go over. So, who was Paul? Well, a little bit about his background. He was originally known as Saul of Tarsus. The reason he eventually changed his name, it happened, well, we don't really know why he changed his name. It just happened around the time that he converted to Christianity because he was originally a Jew. And when he was a Jew, he was deeply rooted in Jewish culture and like Jewish traditions. He had a very strict adherence to it. He was born a Roman citizen in the city of Tarsus, which is why he was known as Saul of Tarsus. He was born around 5 AD in the province of Cilicia, which is located in modern day Turkey. So, Paul's early life was marked by rigorous religious training. As I stated earlier, he was very deeply rooted in Jewish culture. He he had like a profound understanding of the religion and he just knew a lot about it. Paul was educated under the famous Jewish teacher Gamaliel. Paul was educated in the city of Jerusalem. He became very well versed in the Hebrew scriptures, laws, and traditions. This education not only gave him, a profound understanding of Jewish theology, but it also equipped him with the skills to engage in religious debates and teachings, which is something that he would very often do. Originally, Paul was actually a prosecutor of Christians. He would often, hunt them down, imprison them, and things of that nature, before ultimately converting later in his life to Christianity. Paul viewed Christians as a threat to Jerusalem, and as I stated, he would imprison anyone who followed Jesus and thought that Jesus was like the Messiah. And then off to the side here, I have a drawing of Gamaliel, uh, Paul's teacher. It was drawn around 1400 AD, so kind of an interesting thing to see. So a turning point eventually came around in Paul's life on the road to Damascus. He intended to, or his goal was to travel to Damascus to persecute more Christians and imprison more followers of Christ. However, it's on the road here, or like on the journey there, that he decided to convert to Christianity. And the reason that is given for this, or the story that is told about it, is that one day while he was traveling, he had a divine encounter. As the story grows, a bright light had shone down from heaven and surrounded him, and it was telling him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? This profound experience left Paul temporarily blinded and deeply shaken. Paul later realized, or at least thought, that this voice was Jesus Christ, and so that is the main factor that caused him to then want to dedicate his life to Christianity and become a spreader of the gospel and the Bible and things of that nature. After being led into Damascus, he was visited by a Christian disciple named Ananias, who healed his blindness and baptized him. It was because of this event that Paul had gone through that he then decided to go on these missionary journeys where he would spread Christianity all throughout the Mediterranean and Central Europe. So now that we have a little bit about who Paul is and what he did, or at least not what he did, but like his early life and his conversion into Christianity, now I would like to go ahead and move on and start talking about his first missionary journey that he ends up taking. So, a little bit of background information about Paul's first missionary journey. It is estimated to have taken place from around 46 to 48 ID. I say estimated because the Bible does not give out specific dates of when things happen. A lot of it is just sort of evidence and things like that that lead us to believe the exact date would be 46 to 48 AD. Now, this first journey is detailed in the book of Acts, sorry, chapters 13 through 14. These are mainly detailed in his letters, also known as epistles, that he wrote to Luke, who is one of the authors of the book of Acts. A lot of what we know about Paul's journeys are from the book of Acts. However, we do have outside evidence suggesting that he did take these journeys. This first missionary journey he took sort of set the stage for the next few that he would also end up taking, and it is what mainly started the spread of Christianity beyond the Jewish community and more into the Gentile world. Gentile refers to anyone that's not Jewish or, anyone that's not already a Christian. So here I have a map of the first missionary journey. This kind of just overviews the places that he went to and the travels that he took. It starts here in Antioch, Syria. There is two different Antiochs. There's Antioch Pistia and Antioch, Syria. It starts in Antioch, Syria. He then travels from there to the island of Cyprus. He visits the city of Salamis, travels across the island to Paphos, and then sails across back to the mainland to Perga, where he visits Antioch Pistia. Once again, Antioch, Syria and Antioch Pistia are two different places. He travels from Pistia to Lystra, then to Derbe, and then to I, and then from Derbe back to Lystra, then to Iconium, and then back to Antioch Pistia, travels back down to Perga, and then basically just goes back to Antioch. Is sort of the main overview of everywhere that he went on his first journey. It's important to note that this entire region is pretty much Turkey, or what is modern day Turkey. That is around where the first journey was taken. Now I'm going to go ahead and go into a lot more detail just about the events that took place at these different locations that he traveled to. Some of the people that he met and encountered and things like that. So Paul had two companions on this first journey that he took, Barnabas and John Mark. Barnabas was a fellow Christian leader, also deeply rooted in Christianity. He knew a lot about it. John Mark served as their assistant or sort of just their helping companion throughout the journey. Now, Paul and Barnabas, they were commissioned by the Church of Antioch, which basically means that they were sent on these journeys by the Church of Antioch, which is located in Antioch, Syria. Um, they set sail from Seleucia, which is the port city of Antioch. Paul and Barnabas, their goal for this journey was to obviously spread the gospel, and that was their mission. The journey began with, like I said, the sail from Seleucia, which was the port city of Antioch, to the island of Cyprus. In Cyprus, they started their ministry in the city of Salamis, where they preached in various Jewish synagogues. This was a common strategy for Paul, and as synagogues were places where he could find people similar with the scripture, or familiar with the scripture, sorry, and engage them in discussions about Jesus as the Messiah. From Salamis, they traveled across the island to Paphos. Also, off to the side here, I have some ruins, or a picture of some ruins from the city of Antioch. Kind of an interesting thing to look at. So, as I said, they traveled across the island from Salamis, which is on the right side of the island, to Paphos, which is on the left side of the island. It is here where they encountered a Roman official named Sergius Paulus. Sergius was a very intelligent man, and he specifically found Paul because he wanted to hear about Christianity and he was interested in it. However, a Jewish magician, or sort of like a false prophet named Elymas, wanted to prove otherwise. The Jewish magician tried to turn Sergius away from Christianity, and as the story goes, Paul blinded the man Paul blinded Elymas. However, it was a temporary blinding, and he healed him. This then causes Sergius. It causes him to believe in the teachings of Paul and convert to Christianity. After this successful mission in Cyprus, Paul and his companions then decide to sail to Perga in Pamphylia. Perga was an ancient Greek city located in modern day Turkey. This is actually where John Mark decided to leave them and return back to Jerusalem. It's unclear why he returned. Some people think that it was simply because he was homesick. However, other people think that it's because he wanted to go visit his family, which I guess is kind of the same thing, being homesick and wanting to go visit your family. However, he does end up departing from Barnabas and Paul. Now, this departure would later cause a point of contention between Paul and Barnabas. I'll get more into that later, though. From here, Paul and Barnabas then decide to move on to Iconium. Off to the side here, I do have a drawing of ancient. Uh, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Off to the side is a drawing of ancient Perga. Excuse me, I didn't mean to say Antioch and Pistia. So from there, Paul and Barnabas they travel to Antioch and Pistia, not Iconium, and it's here where they face some opposition when they go to start preaching. Paul delivered a powerful sermon here, recounting the history of Israel and proclaiming Jesus as the fulfillment of God's promises. His message was well received by many, both Jews and the Gentiles. However, their success also stirred up a lot of opposition. Some of the Jewish leaders, filled with their jealousy, incited prominent city leaders against Paul and Barnabas, leading to their expulsion from the city. Undeterred, they shook off their feet and then continued to Iconium. Iconium is located in the Konya province of modern-day Turkey. In Iconium, they continued their pattern of preaching in the synagogue, and once again, many Jews and Gentiles believe. However, also, once again, the city became divided, and some people supported not John and Barnabas, Barnabas and Paul. Some people supported the two of them. However, a lot of them, once again, did not support them. A plot to mistreat and stone Paul and Barnabas forced them to flee the city and move on to Lystra. In Lystra, it's said that Paul performed a miracle, or at least that's how the story goes. Here, he heals a man who had been lame from birth. A lot of the locals, having witnessed this miracle, mistakenly thought that Paul and Barnabas were actually gods. They said that they were Hermes and Zeus. The apostles vehemently rejected this adoration. They obviously did not want to be seen that way, as their goal was to spread Christianity, and Christianity is one God, not multiple gods. After this misunderstanding, some Jews from the city of Antioch and Iconium arrived and persuaded the crowd to turn against Paul and Barnabas. And so it's here where the Jewish people stone and drag Paul out of the city and leave him outside of the gates. Now, it was assumed that Paul was dead. However, miraculously, he got back up and they continued on to the city of Derbe. In Derbe, they preached the gospel and made many new disciples, and they converted many people to Christianity. Afterward, they basically backtracked. They traveled back to Lystra and Iconium and Pistian Antioch to strengthen the disciples and appoint elders in each church. They encouraged the new believers to remain steadfast in their faith and reminded them that we must go through many hardships to enter the kingdom of God, or at least that's the direct quote that Paul has, or a direct quote from Paul. Finally, Paul and Barnabas returned to Antioch in Syria, where they reported all that God had done through them and how he had opened up a door to the faith, how he had opened up the door of faith to the Gentiles. After returning back to Antioch in Syria, this sort of marked the end of their first journey. This journey was not only significant for establishing several new Christian communities, but it also demonstrated the message of Jesus, or it demonstrated the message that Jesus was for all people. Paul's first missionary journey set the stage for all the other ones. It showcased Paul's resilience and his dedication even in the face of like opposition from many of the Jewish people and just a lot of the people that did not believe in Christ. This journey set the tone for all the journeys that he was going to take after that, and it played a crucial role in the development of the early Christian church. Now that I've sort of gone over the first journey here, we're going to go ahead and move on to the second journey. So, for a little bit of background information about Paul's second missionary journey, it took place around 49 to 52 AD. This journey is detailed in the Acts of the Apostles in the New Testament, specifically in chapters 15 to 18. This journey once again began in Antioch. It's on this journey that he strengthens his disciples and he makes many new converts. It's also this journey that inspires him to go to places in Europe where Christianity was um, almost unheard of. Throughout this journey, they would cover several regions, including Asia Minor, Macedonia, and Greece. And once again, the primary aim was to spread the gospel and collect new converts. Off to the side here, I have a drawing of St. Paul done in the early 1400s. So here I have a map of his second missionary journey. It starts here in Antioch, Syria, once again. From there, he goes to Tarsus and then to Derbe, Lystra, Iconium, basically just kind of retracing his steps from the first journey. And it's from Antioch, Pistia, that he actually travels more into sort of the Macedonia and Greece region, and he travels all throughout there into Athens, into Corinth, and then to Ephesus, and then from there he sails across the Mediterranean to oh, I apologize, did not mean to skip that slide there. He travels from Ephesus across the Mediterranean into Nazareth and Jerusalem, and then eventually heads back to Antioch. So, the beginning of the journey. The journey begins with Paul and his companion Barnabas parting ways due to a disagreement over John Mark. John Mark was originally going to go on this journey again, however, Paul was worried about him abandoning them. So Barnabas did not want to go with if John Mark was not allowed to go with. One interesting thing that I actually learned was that Barnabas and John Mark were actually cousins, which could explain the fact why Barnabas would have had like a strong connection with John Mark and why he wouldn't have wanted to go on the second journey if John Mark also could not go. That was an interesting thing that I had learned while doing the research for this. So then Paul had to choose a new companion, and he chose Silas, who was a leader of the church in Jerusalem. And with his new companion, they set out from Antioch to Syria and Cilicia. His goal for this, basically, as I stated earlier, he sort of went to a lot of the cities that he had gone to in the first journey, with the main goal being to revisit some of the followers that he had gained. He wanted to instill wisdom into the churches that he had established to continue to lead them under the way of Christianity. Off to the side here, I have a carving or sort of like a sculpture that is made to depict Silas, which was his new companion for this journey. After Cilicia, they then went to Derbe and Lystra, where they met Timothy, who was a young disciple who decided to join them on their mission. It's from here that Paul, Silas, and Timothy then traveled through the region of Phrygia and Galatia into the western central part of Turkey, or modern day Turkey, and they eventually made their way to Troas in the northwestern coast. Once again, traveling through these regions, they were just they were kind of reinstilling faith into the churches that Paul had previously established. Once again, he just wanted to visit them and sort of make sure that they were doing everything all right. Now, it's in Troas where Paul claims to have had, or Paul says that he had a vision of a man from Macedonia begging him to come and help him. Paul interpreted this call as a sign from God and immediately set sail for Macedonia. And this was important because it marked the first time that the gospel or Christianity had been brought to that part of Europe. Before this, that part of Europe hadn't even heard of Christianity, and so Paul was basically the first person to bring it over there. So when they first got to Macedonia, their first stop was Philippi, which was a Roman colony located in modern day Greece. It's here where they met Lydia, who was a woman who sold purple cloth. Um, she ends up becoming their first convert in Macedonia, actually. After this, Paul, Silas, and Timothy, they go around preaching, and it's said that they sort of did like a ritual, or not really a ritual, but more like a. It said that they cast like an evil spirit out of a woman, and it's because of this that the people in Philippi then decide to arrest Paul and Silas. They were imprisoned and beaten, and then they were held captive in the jail cell of like a family jail kind of. It's a little bit hard to explain. What I meant by that more so was they were held captive by a jailer who was holding them until the government would come in and try them or decide what to do with them. Now, even though Paul and Silas were imprisoned and beaten, they continued to preach, and they were actually able to convert the jailer and his entire family to convert to Christianity, just by simply preaching to them and telling them about Jesus and who he was. And it is because of this that the jailer then decides to let them go. Off to the side here, I have an image drawn of Paul, Silas being imprisoned and held captive. And then I think at the top there, the guy with the torch, I would assume he's the jailer or the one that was holding them captive. After the city of Philippi, Paul and his companions then decide to travel to Thessalonica in modern day Greece, where they preached in the synagogues. Their message at the synagogue was left it left a lot of the Jews like very angry with them, so they then decided to start a riot. Now, this riot then forced them to leave the city, so they then traveled to the city of Berea. Here in Berea, they found a lot more of a receptive audience. However, the Jewish people from the city of Thessalonica then followed and came to Berea to prosecute Paul and Silas and his companions. So, for his safety, Paul then decided he would travel to Athens, and then he left Silas and Timothy in Berea, where they would go ahead and help build up the church there and sort of help guide the followers. And then, meanwhile, like I said, Paul then decided to travel to Athens. Now, in Athens, Paul was very distressed by a lot of the adultery that he saw, and he engaged with a lot of debates with philosophers at the Areopagus, which was sort of like the meeting place of the earliest aristocratic council of Athens. And then adultery means the worship of multiple gods, or just what one would believe to be false gods. Now, it was in the Areopagus where he gave his unknown god sermon. Paul had found an inscription on an altar that said, "To an unknown god." The people of Athens worshipped many gods, and so they didn't know, or they had altars that were dedicated to gods that they didn't know about. Basically, what I mean is that the altar was saying, to an unknown god. They're saying that's to a god that they don't know exists because they believed in that there were so many other gods that there's probably gods they don't know that exist. So they want to make sure to sort of appease all of the gods and make all of them happy, even the ones that they don't know about. Paul used this altar sort of like as a starting point to give a sermon about how Jesus is the unknown God and that he's the only God. He explained that Jesus was sort of the unknown God to these people, however, he would become known. Although some people mocked him, a few people um, really, a few people really liked to hear what he had to say. Specifically, two people, Dionysus and Areopagite, were extremely moved by this, and they became leaders of the fellowship in Athens. After his time in Athens, Paul travels to Corinth, where he actually ended up staying for about a year and a half, and he made a really large impact here by preaching and establishing a very strong church in Corinth. It's here in Corinth that Paul met Priscilla and Aquila, who were fellow believers, and they ended up becoming his close friends and co workers during his time in Corinth. Despite a lot of opposition from the Jewish community in Corinth, Paul persisted and he was able to convert a lot of the Corinthians to Christianity. After his time in Corinth, he then decided to move on to Ephesus. It's on the island of Ephesus that he actually just started a new church, and he left Priscilla and Aquila to go ahead and help run that church. Off to the side here, I have an image of some ruins from Ephesus. Um, Cool thing to look at. He then made a quick return to Caesarea, where he greeted the church there, and finally traveled back to Antioch, where his journey had started. This then concludes the second missionary journey that Paul had taken. Now, this second missionary journey was once again an immense amount of growth from for Christianity. It spread Christianity to a place where it had never previously been before, and it exposed a lot of people to it. Paul brought Christianity to a lot of new regions, and he established strong Christian communities that had a lasting impact on those areas. And overall, that concludes his second missionary journey, and now we are going to be moving on to the third one. So now on to Paul's third missionary journey here. It took place around 53 to 57 AD. This journey is once again documented in the Acts of the Apostles, specifically chapters 18 to 21. Once again, just like the last two, it started in Antioch, Syria. In this journey, he traveled through the regions of Galatia and Phrygia to revisit churches and his disciples. As I stated with the second journey, one thing he commonly did was revisit churches to reestablish the presence of Christianity, and to just sort of help guide the people who and just to sort of help guide the people who were following Christianity in those places. Now, this journey covers various regions, including Galatia, Phrygia, Asia, Macedonia, Greece. Once again, primary goal was the same as the last two journeys, spreading and growing Christianity. So here I have a map of where the journey went once again. This one is pretty similar to the second one. It goes through a lot of the same region here, mainly just traveling through the places that he had already been to and reestablishing his presence and sort of reinforcing the churches that he had already set up. However, you will notice that this one does end in Jerusalem instead of ending where it began. That is because at the end of this journey, he does get arrested. So, after traveling through the regions of Galatia and Phrygia, strengthening his disciples and revisiting his churches, he then arrives in Ephesus, where he had left Aquila and Priscilla. He spends a large amount of time in Ephesus, approximately 3 years, making it one of the longest stays on his missionary journeys. Ephesus was a major center of commerce and religion. It was the home of the Temple of Artemis and one of the seven, which is one of the seven ancient wonders of the world. In Ephesus, Paul encountered some disciples who had only received John's baptism. He explained to them that the significance of Jesus' baptism was that they were baptized in the name of the Lord Jesus. Paul laid his hands on them and sort of had them receive the Holy Spirit, and prophesies that they would become followers of Jesus Christ. This event sort of marked the beginning of a very strong not prophecy, a very strong ministry in Ephesus, where Paul would convert many of the people there and lead a lot of Ephesus into Christianity. Now, because of all these conversions that Paul was doing, it actually affected the local economy of Ephesus, particularly the trade of the silver shrines of Artemis. Because so many people were being converted into Christianity, less people were buying these sort of like little silver statues that people would get to worship the Greek god Artemis. They were sort of like small little replicas of the Temple of Artemis. Now, this caused a local silversmith by the name of Demetrius to sort of grow discontent with Paul. He started to grow to resent Paul and Christianity. The reason for that being that he was one of the people who made those silver temples of Artemis, and so it was negatively affecting his business. And so the silversmith gathered some of his friends and started a riot in the city. Eventually, the rioters stopped as they realized that they could get arrested for rioting, and they didn't want to be arrested. Fair enough. I too don't like to get arrested, so that makes sense. However, it was after this event that Paul decided it was time to move on from Ephesus, as he had spent a lot of time there, and it was clear that he was starting to sort of just have a lot of opposition there. And so from Ephesus, Paul then travels to Macedonia, once again encouraging the believers that he had previously established. He eventually travels to Greece, where he actually stays for 3 months. It was during this time in Greece that Paul wrote the epistles or the letters to the Romans. However, due to a plot against him from the local Jewish community, um, Paul was forced out. So after Greece, he then traveled to Troas, where he gave a powerful sermon. During the sermon, a young man named Eutychius fell from a window, and according to the story, he actually died from that. However, Paul was able to raise him from the dead using the power of God. Once again, that is according to the story that had happened in the Bible. At least that's what the Bible says had happened. It was because of this that he was able to get a lot of converts in the city of Trios, and he started a church there. Off to the side here, I have a picture of something called the Gates of St. Paul. These are located near the city of Trios and were built in the Middle Ages to honor St. Paul, or this one was. Interesting thing about this, there was multiple gates that were built. I think there's seven in total, and each of them were named after something that was important to people during that time. And so, since Christianity was a lot larger of a factor, they decided to name one of them after St. Paul. So yeah, it's kind of a cool little piece of information, I suppose. Doesn't really have to do anything with the missionary journey, as this gate was built, years after that happened. However, it is close to where Traos is at. From Traos, Paul then traveled to Miletus, where he sent for the elders of the church in Ephesus. So this would be like um, Priscilla and Aquilus and like elders from the local churches that Paul had established. Now he called them all to Miletus to give them a farewell speech. Paul warned them of the future troubles that they would face. He explained that they needed to stay vigilant and shepherd the flock. This was an analogy for the people. Um, Paul was calling for them to protect the people and be shepherds for the people or the Christians in their communities to help guide and support them. After this, Paul continued his journey, stopping in various cities like Tyre and Ptolemais, where he met with disciples and unloaded cargo from his ships. After this, he eventually arrives in Caesarea, where he stays with Philip the evangelist. Philip was one of the seven deacons. Deacons were basically just people appointed to sort of help local Christians at churches. They were typically appointed by the churches for the local Christians. During his stay in Caesarea, a prophet named Agabus warned Paul that he would be bound and handed over to the Gentiles if he traveled to Jerusalem. However, Paul ignored this and he traveled to Jerusalem anyways. He was determined to go to Jerusalem, saying that he was not ready. He was ready to not only be bound, but also to die for the Lord. And so Paul continued, and Paul's third missionary journey concluded with him arriving in Jerusalem. At first, he was warmly received by the believers there. He started to preach at the various temples. However, this eventually did start a riot from the local Jewish community. His presence and his causing of these riots eventually led to his arrest, which fulfilled Agabus's prophecy. Agabus was the prophet that warned him not to go to Jerusalem. This arrest marked the beginning of Paul's journey to Rome, where he would eventually stand trial, which we will get to here in a minute. Overall, Paul's third missionary journey was sort of like a recap for him to go through and reinforce a lot of the followers that he started and to revisit the churches that he started. Once again, just like the previous two, it was a major step in um, the spread of Christianity, once again to establish the gospel in cities and places where it had not been before. Now we're going to go ahead and move on to Paul's journey to Rome. So, Paul's journey to Rome is talked about in the book of Acts in chapters 27 and 28, and it takes place in the year 59 AD. This journey marks the culmination of Paul's missionary journeys and is sort of like the ultimate fate as his prisoner in Rome. This journey picks up where the last one left off, with Paul being arrested and held prisoner in Caesarea for 2 years. The Jewish leaders had accused him of causing unrest and defiling a temple. Now, as a Roman citizen, Paul exercised the right to appeal to Caesar, which basically meant that he could appeal to the Roman courts. However, this did require him to be sent to Rome. And so Paul's journey to Rome begins as he is imprisoned and put on a boat to then be sent to Rome. Here I have a map of Paul's journey to Rome. It starts in Jerusalem. He is taken to Sidon, where he then departs and sort of stays on the coast the whole time, or at least the ship stays on the coast the whole time, or close to the coast. It makes stops in Myra and travels all throughout the Mediterranean and Aegean seas. Eventually, it stops in the Fair Havens, and from there it travels across the Mediterranean to Malta, Syracuse, and then goes through all the way up to Italy, where Paul arrives in Rome and marks the end of Paul's journey to Rome. As you can see, kind of in between Fair Havens and Malta, on the way through the Mediterranean, Paul's ship is lost in a storm. So Paul was placed under the custody of a Roman centurion named Julius, who was sort of like a Roman commander. Paul and the other prisoners boarded a ship bound for Italy. The voyage was full of problems from the beginning. The ship sailed from Caesarea to Sidon, where they were forced to sail along the coast of Cyprus due to the adverse winds. They then arrived in Myra, where they transferred to a larger Alexandrian grain ship, but the journey continued to be plagued by strong winds. They were forced to sail along the southern coast of Crete until they reached a place called Fair Havens along the southern coast of Crete. It was already late in the sailing season, and Paul warned them that continuing their voyage would be disastrous. However, the centurion ignored Paul's advice, trusting the ship's captain and owner instead. Soon after leaving Fairhaven, they encountered a violent storm, known as a northeaster, which drove the entire ship off course. For 14 days, the storm raged, and the crew did everything to keep the ship afloat. They threw cargo and tackle overboard. They were doing absolutely everything they could. However, Paul reassured them through all of this that they would be okay, claiming that God had sort of told him so, or that he had a vision that would be they, or that they he had a vision that they would be okay eventually. Eventually, they approached land and attempted to run the ship around the beach. Sorry, I meant that they attempted to run the ship onto the beach. However, the ship began to sort of like break apart as it struck a sandbar. The soldiers then planned to kill all the prisoners so that way they could prevent anyone from escaping. However, the centurion wanted to save Paul after hearing sort of the reassuring words that Paul had given them while they were lost at sea. And so Julius stopped them, or as he stopped the soldiers from killing all of the prisoners. Miraculously, all 276 people on the board or on the ship made it to shore safely, as Paul had foretold. They found themselves on the island of Malta, which is located in sort of the western Mediterranean Sea. The islanders there showed them great hospitality and provided them with shelter, food, and water, and things of that nature. At one point, Paul ventured out to gather firewood and was bitten by a viper while doing so. The natives told everyone that he would die, however, Paul miraculously survived. Paul used this moment to preach about the power of God and converted many of the islanders because of this. Paul also healed many of the sick on the island, including the father of Publius, the chief official. Um, it's because of acts like these that Paul was able to preach to and convert many of the people, or the natives, on the island of Malta. After about 3 months on the island of Malta, Paul continued his journey onto another Alexandrian ship, or at least all the prisoners were taken onto another Alexandrian ship, where they continued to Italy. They sailed to Syracuse, and then to Rhegium, both cities on the coast of Italy, and finally to Puteoli in Italy. From there, Paul and his convan- Paul and his companions, traveled overland to Rome. In Rome, it was decided that Paul could continue to live on his own, however, he would still be imprisoned and kept under guard. Despite this, Paul continued to preach and spread the gospel in Rome for 2 more years, before eventually being released. Paul's journey to Rome was not just a physical voyage, but it was also sort of like it was a testament to his unwavering faith and dedication to his mission. Even though he was being held prisoner, and even though he was going through shipwrecks and storms, he still continued to preach the gospel and try to spread Christianity. No matter what, that was like his goal, and that was just what he was focused on. And even after everything, he was even still able to get a lot of Christian converts. And so Paul arriving in Rome marks the end of his journey to Rome. And now I will go ahead and move on to the conclusion, where I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about what ends up happening to Paul. So to put it simply, we don't really actually know. It was estimated that Paul was about his 60s by the time he was released from prison in Rome. It is said that he mentioned a desire to travel to Spain, which was something that I had never known about. Um, However, we're unsure if he ever actually took this missionary journey, because it is estimated that he was, around 60 at this time, so we have no clue how much longer he lived after that. Living to your 60s around this time period was almost unheard of in the first place, so living past that would have been quite surprising. Overall, I think the journeys of Paul are sort of a testament to the willpower of man. Paul went through so much, and he was stoned, he was imprisoned, he went through shipwrecks and storms, and he traveled hundreds of miles. And he suffered all of this simply to achieve one goal, and that being to spread Christianity. No matter what, he would not give up with this, and he continued on. It's really important to note that without Paul, we would not have Christianity today. He was one of the main reasons that it was able to reach the numbers that it did. He spread Christianity all throughout the Mediterranean and Eastern, Central sort of Europe. And it's because of him that Christianity became as big as it did. So overall, Paul largely achieved his goal. He went through a lot, and it was all worth it as he was able to get what he wanted from doing all that. And so that concludes my presentation about St. Paul and his missionary journeys. I want to thank you for listening. I really appreciate, taking the time. It's quite lengthy here at about 50 minutes. I'm just going to go ahead and talk about some of my sources and some of my citations for the things that I talked about. So for my information sources, I have this book called The Apostle Paul and His Letters. This basically goes through and in detail it explains the book of Acts and the specifically the parts that talk about Paul's journeys to Paul's missionary journeys and his journey to Rome. It was a very helpful source, probably my most helpful source that I had along this. Some other things I had were some articles. One of them, or some other sources that I used was this article, Paul's third missionary journey and Paul's second missionary journey, written by sort of the same publisher, which basically just kind of did a little overview of the second and third journeys. Paul's missionary journeys as reflected in his letters. Once again, just sort of kind of helped as an overview of the journeys and helped me just sort of to line everything up and sort of cross reference and confirm everything. The same thing happens in this one, the same thing happens in that one, so clearly it must have happened, sort of thing. And then we have the Macedonian scene of Paul's journeys. This was an article that was basically sort of going over a lot of the archaeology of Macedonia and the places that Paul visited and just showing proof, I guess, kind of that Paul had been there. Really hard, obviously, to show proof of something that happened that long ago. However, it does show, the temples that he had visited and sort of things of those nature. And then I have the archaeology of St. Paul in Greek lands. It's pretty similar to the archaeology of St. Paul in Macedonia lands. It just sort of goes over the archaeological sites that Paul, would have been in when he was alive. Then I have this one, Paul's missionary journey to Spain, tradition and folklore. This is the one that talks about Paul's desire to travel to Spain. Once again, we don't know if that actually happens. However, that's where I found out about that. Oh. And then I have Paul's letter to the Romans, which was sort of an overview of Paul's journey to Rome. So again, another helpful source to just kind of cross-reference things and make sure everything sort of lines up so that way I know it's correct. And then for the next few slides, I just have the image sources. I'm not going to go into as much detail as I did with the information sources. However, they are here if you would like to look at them. And so yeah, those are basically just all the citations I have for all the images I used throughout the slideshow, in case you were wondering where I got those from. Overall, I just want to thank you for listening and taking the time to watch my presentation. I appreciate it, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. And once again, just thank you for listening and taking the time out of your day.